All right, so last week we got into chapter 4. And in chapter 4, Peter gave us a list of things that we should not be involved with as Christians, and we were discussing at the end of the class some of what he says we should be doing to live our lives as Christians, and especially undergoing persecution. We talked about how that's what was happening with them here. So we're going to start off with reading 1 Peter chapter 4, verses 7 through 11 again. And that's where we ended last time. You guys have that, or you want me to go ahead? All right. The end of all things is at hand. Therefore be of sound judgment and sober spirit for the purpose of prayer. Above all, keep fervent in your love for one another, because love covers a multitude of sins. Be hospitable to one another without complaint. As each one has received a special gift, employ it in serving one another as good stewards of the manifold grace of God. Whoever speaks, let him speak, as it were, the utterances of God. Whoever serves, let him do so as by the strength which God supplies, so that in all things God may be glorified through Jesus Christ, to whom belongs the glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen. All right, so we talked about how Peter emphasizes love and talks about how love covers a multitude of sins, and I think Jimmy mentioned that kind of goes back to, was it James, where it talks about rescuing people gently out of sin. So love, if we have love for each other, what does that mean? That means that we're more forgiving, we give grace to each other, and then, of course, we treat each other right, which is the other thing that he emphasizes, hospitality. And we talked a little bit about why those things were emphasized, both from a perspective of with each other and how we treat each other, and also how we try to bring others into the church, how we try to bring others into being saved. So those things are important. We talked about, and this is important, the end of all things is at hand. What's he referring to? It makes it sound like the end time judgment, right? But we've talked about it in the past, and we'll see this again as we go through the rest of chapter 4. A lot of times when it talks about the last times, it's referring to the end of the state of Israel, not the current state, but the nation of Israel, as was the Jewish nation in the time of Christ, and what was going to happen, the destruction of Jerusalem, right? So it's talking about the end of those things and what was going to come. And that destruction was to occur in AD 70. So I think when you read this in context, it seems like that's probably what it's referring to, because it's talking about that are under persecution. We know, and then we know that this was to come. So it would seem that that fits with what we're reading here. Also, it's at hand typically means to happen soon, not something looking far off. We talked about that in Revelation, when it's saying that this is about to happen. So we wouldn't be looking at something far into the future. We started talking about, so what, because we're in these last days, or they were in the last days, and we are, anything that's talking about the end of Jerusalem is still relevant to us today, as far as being in the last days, because we're in the last days until there aren't any more days, right? So it's relevant to us. So what does he say we should do? And he says, first off, be of sound judgment and sober spirit. So we're to think about what we're doing and realize the importance of what we do. A sober spirit, also, he says, will realize the necessity of prayer, praying to God. And he says that we're to be fervent in our love, once again, emphasizing love for each other, being hospitable to each other. And then he says we're to use our gifts. We've discussed spiritual gifts before from time to time. And I think whenever you see these lists that the writers of the New Testament give of gifts, they list off both miraculous and non-miraculous, right? There's spiritual gifts that are what we might call inherent talents, where our strengths. Somebody might be good at being hospitable to people, might be good at giving to people, might be good at speaking, teaching. Like, there's different things that we might be good at, and those can be spiritual gifts. But then there were also miraculous gifts, right? Like being able to speak in another language that you never had studied, or being able to speak in your language and them understand you. We see that with the apostles on the day of Pentecost, right? everybody was hearing in their own language. So there's things like that, being able to heal people and those kind of things. So there were two different kinds of gifts. A lot of times in these lists, I think they're mixed and given. Here, Peter gives two specific lists, two specific gifts in his list: speaking or teaching, and then serving, accomplishing tasks for the church. And so he says that we're to use these gifts that God has given us to serve each other and to glorify God. And this list, of course, another place that we see the list is in Romans 12, 3 through 8. You can read that real quick to kind of expand on it. It's Peter covers what Paul covers in much shorter order. Like, everything Peter does is very concise, where Paul kind of goes into a little bit more elaboration in some of the things that he writes. But Romans 12, 3 through 8.
For though the grace is given to me, I say to everything among you, not to think more highly of yourself than he ought to think, but to think also that to have sound judgment, as for God allotted to each members of faith. For such as we have many members of one body, and for all the members do not have the same function, so do we who are many are one body in Christ, and individually members of one another. Since we have gifts that differ according to grace given to us, each is given us to exercise them accordingly. If prophecy according to the proportion of his faith, if its services... Oh, hang on. I just skipped. Proportion to his faith, if service to his own serving... Why does that keep... To each his teaching, and each teaching, or exerts his own exhortation, he who with liberty, who leads with diligence, he also shows mercy with faithfulness.
Okay. So this list that Peter gives, I think, is similar to the list that Paul gives here in Romans. Paul kind of emphasizes and does so in both Romans and Corinthians, the letters to Rome and Corinth, that the gifts aren't given to make one proud of oneself or to puff us up. It's not for our self-importance. What was the purpose? At this point, it was the edification of the church and to build the church up. And so that's really emphasized here. So what's our job with the gifts that God gives us today? Same as it was then, right? To use it to build up the church and to reach out to those who around us who aren't Christians. Okay, so any other comments there on that section that I didn't cover? All right, let's go ahead, and if we can read the rest of chapter 4, verses 12 through 19 of 1 Peter there. First Peter 4, 12 through 19. You guys okay, or you want me to go ahead? Chapter 4, 12 through 19. All right. Oh, I got it then. No problem. All right. Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. But to the degree that you share the sufferings of Christ, keep on rejoicing, so that also at the revelation of his glory you may rejoice with exultation. If you are reviled for the name of Christ, you are blessed, because the Spirit of glory and of God rests upon you. By no means let any of you suffer as a murderer or thief or evildoer or a troublesome meddler. But if anyone suffers as a Christian, let him not feel ashamed, but in that name let him glorify God. For it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. And if it begins with us first, what will be the outcome for those who do not obey the gospel of God? And if it is with difficulty that the righteous is saved, what will become of the godless man and the sinner? Therefore, let those also who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right. All right, so of course, as we've been discussing, Peter now turns to, again, reminding us of Christ and the example that he left us and the suffering that he went through, and says that we're to follow in that example. What false assumption does Peter correct here in verse 12, where he says, "Beloved, do not be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you, which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you"? What do people sometimes think when they become a Christian? What's going to happen?
Easy street.
Yeah, that things are going to go great and that everything is good. And what actually tends to happen?
The opposite.
Quite the opposite, right? It's not all great whenever we become Christians. So people who think that the life of the Christian will be nothing but prosperity and joy are going to fall away pretty quickly, because they'll find pretty quickly that that's not what's going to happen. We're not going to be protected from the bad things that happen to us. They're going to continue to come. So what's the difference between enduring suffering, and rejoicing in it? Peter says that we're to rejoice in our suffering. Why is that important? Yep. If we're just enduring it, what does that mean? Surviving it, you're not happy to go. Well, I guess you're never happy even if you were rejoicing. Those are two different things. But if you're just enduring it, it's kind of like if you're in a job that you don't enjoy, which hopefully nobody here is, but if you're in a job that you don't like and you have to go to work every day, what's your attitude toward that job?
Not great.
Yeah, it's not great. You don't go in with a great attitude, right? Were you? Is he? Okay, I was gonna say, is he not happy or?
No, she's not.
Okay, but if you're not happy, it impacts what you do, and how your what is the word I'm looking for? Your disposition. It impacts a lot of things, but yeah, your attitude especially, of course. So if it is like, oh, I got to go through this again, that's one thing. But to rejoice in it means you do it with an understanding of what it's all about, right? And I don't think it means that you're going around like, ooh, great, I get to endure this again today or whatever. But it means that you have the right attitude, and that impacts then long term. Because if you're just enduring something, eventually you give it up, or if you don't want to do it anymore. So there's a lot of things that are hard and difficult that are still worth going through, and we know that, and so we do that. But if we have the wrong attitude, we may stop doing it at some point. So it's important for really our long-term Christianity to realize the difference between those two things. So if we're just enduring suffering, we may try to avoid it, right? That's the biggest thing. As a Christian, how do we avoid suffering? How can we avoid it? I mean, you can't avoid the things that everybody has to endure, right? Health problems and those kind of things are going to come no matter what. But what kind of suffering can we avoid if we don't have that strong faith, and if we don't rejoice in it?
I think one that's pretty obvious here in this country is we avoid persecution, we avoid conflict.
Mm-hmm.
We are major avoiders of conflict, and so just not engaging other people, keeping to yourself, isolating yourself.
We're major avoiders of conflict when it's face to face.
Unless it's anonymous, right?
Yeah, I mean, that's the problem. We got a lot of people that are willing to go after people and destroy people online when they're anonymous. And so we have a lot of fighting amongst Christians online. But when we're face to face with somebody who's actually doing something wrong, are we willing and able to speak out? And do we do so in the right way? We'll get to that. We've covered that before, and we'll talk about that again here. But, we need to, as Christians, we need to take advantage of the opportunities we have. Now, once again, that doesn't mean beating people over the head with, oh, you're sinning or whatever. But do we take the opportunities that we're given to to speak up in the right way, once again, but to try to encourage people or to point out something, rather than saying, hey, you're sinning, you say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you didn't do that, or or things like that. Do we take the opportunities that we have? I think, like Jimmy said, often not, right? We just avoid it completely and don't say anything. Of course, you're walking a line here because we also don't want to be like the person on the street corner that everybody thinks is loony, right? Out there, like that's out there saying the end of times has come, and that kind of thing. So we have to be aware of how we're going about presenting that to people. Do you have a comment? No?
I was just going to say another way we do it is we avoid it by, you kind of alluded to it, but not engaging people who are in bad situations. And it's really ingrained in us that if somebody's yelling and screaming at somebody and you have a domestic violence kind of thing going on, just avoid it. It's not really our business. But it's, I remember one time I stopped somebody. This guy was yelling and screaming. I was sitting in my office at the other building, and he was just screaming at this lady and, cussing her out and very, very violent talk. So I walked over there. I walked out. He was in his car, and I could still hear him screaming. So I walked over, and I asked her if she was okay. And he told me to, get the blank out of here, that it's not my business. And I said, you made it my business. Like, the fact that you're yelling and screaming and I can hear you half a block away, it's my business. And, he ended up driving off. He shouted he was going to kill me or something like that. And he drove off, so I called the cops and had them go hunt him down. I got his license plate number, and, we need to do those kinds of things, and there could be very severe repercussions for that. And a lot of Christians will avoid that because they're like, well, it's not really our place to say anything. But it is.
If we don't work in the world, who's going to be the light of the world, right? But I think we need to be willing to step out. I think with you call that judiciously, like making wise decisions about it. But we need to be willing to step out and speak up. Also, like Paul emphasized this same thing as far as how we're to go about it in Ephesians 4:14 through 16. It says, as a result, we are no longer to be children, tossed here and there by waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by the trickery of men, by craftiness and deceitful scheming. But speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in all aspects into him, who is the head, even Christ, from whom the whole body being fitted and held together by that which every joint supplies, according to the proper working of each individual part, causes the growth of the body for the building up of itself in love. So once again, emphasizing how do we go about it, and we each play a role. There's no one person that should be like, it's not my job to do that. It's all of us that are to do that. Peter also emphasizes that there is nothing to be proud of or rejoice in when someone suffers for doing wrong. As we mentioned earlier, we're all going to suffer at some point. And we just have to endure it when it's things that typically happen in life happen to us. But there is honor and there should be rejoicing, Peter is saying, when we suffer for doing what's right. Like we can know that we're doing what's right because we're bringing glory to God when that happens, whenever those kind of things are happening. In verses 17 through 19, I mentioned earlier when we did verse 7 there, the end of all things is at hand. What does that refer to? And I think it's to the destruction of Jerusalem and the end of the nation of Israel at that time. Verses 17 through 19, it says there, for it is time for judgment to begin with the household of God. What judgment do they refer to? And I just gave the answer, actually. I think it's to the judgment on Israel and the end of things in Jerusalem there. But what is the salvation that's being discussed? It sounds like it's the final judgment, right? Whenever you read it. And once again, anytime that we're talking about things dealing with the destruction of Jerusalem, I think they have two applications. It clearly applies to the end judgment, or it can anyway, just like it does to the destruction. But what salvation is being referred to in this case? I think Guy Woods, I looked at what he had to say about it, and he thinks, of course, as I mentioned last week, that Peter is referring to the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the Jewish state. And as I mentioned earlier today, when we studied Revelation, we discussed the term, the time is near. What does that mean? You're not looking far into the future, you're looking soon. So that would seem to be what's being discussed here, something that happens soon. And I think that this fits with, and he said that he thinks that this fits with what Jesus said in Matthew 24:22. If you guys remember, we talked about Matthew 24. That's where people get confused with the signs that are being given. Remember, Jesus talks about these are the signs of the end of times. And what time is he talking about? The destruction of Jerusalem. And he says, and unless those days had been cut short, no life would have been saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days shall be cut short. So referring to the siege around Jerusalem and what was happening there. And remember what the Christians did when they saw those signs that Jesus had given? They fled Jerusalem like they were supposed to, because that's what they had said. He had told them to do. But anyway, I would tend to agree with Guy Woods that this is referring to that destruction. But as I just mentioned, the destruction of Jerusalem is often used as a symbol for the final judgment as well. And I think that this passage also emphasizes that it's difficult for people to be saved in general. And why is that? There's a lot that can get in the way of our salvation. The devil is full of deceit and looks for ways to cause people not to be saved. And I think that one of his, I got that sentence wrong on my notes, but I think that one of his main ways of doing this is to make people think they are good, they're in a good place, without obeying God's commands. Like, hey, I'm a good person, or hey, I go to church, or any number of things you can put in there that they say, hey, I'm good, when they haven't obeyed what God tells them to do. And I think that's the main thing that we can see. What does it mean to obey the gospel? That's an interesting phrase, right? I've talked about that before. How do you obey the gospel? The gospel means good news, right? So how do you obey the good news? Have you ever thought of it that way? Well, what is the good news? Jesus, right?
Everything he taught.
Yeah, so Jesus, if you're obeying the gospel, you're obeying Jesus, is the way I've always interpreted it. So to obey the gospel is to obey God, basically. Why is it difficult for the righteous to be saved? He talks about here that the righteous, and once again, in reference to Jerusalem, the destruction of Jerusalem, that would mean, hey, the good are going to suffer with the bad here. It's going to be difficult for the righteous to get out of this, because this is going to happen. But in relation to just judgment in general, to the end time judgment, why is it difficult for a righteous person to be saved?
Well, it's always easier. It's always easier to destroy than it is to build up. I mean, we're getting interference with each other. But I think it's always easier to destruct, to tear down, to destroy, whether it's your faith or somebody else's. Even if you are a righteous person, I mean, Paul talks about it. He talks about wrestling with sin. I do the things that I don't want to do, and the things that I need to do, I don't do. It's this constant battle for him, and it is for every righteous person. And chapter 5 is all about be alert for the devil. Watch out, because he prowls around. He's waiting to destroy people. So, yeah, it's hard for righteous people to make it. It's very hard.
The devil isn't quiet about it. I mean, he's sneaky, but he's not quiet. Like, we know he's doing it. He's walking around like a roaring lion, not hunting like a tiger stalking its prey, although that could be a metaphor as well used or whatever, but a visual, but
I think the thing is too, like, yes, we know he's doing it because we're allowing him in by the way that we are sinning in our lives. Like, that's where we allow him into our lives. So we know that it's gonna happen if we involve ourselves in the sin.
and right, if we allow ourselves to be tempted, like James talks about, if we allow ourselves to do it, which God won't give us any temptation that we can't overcome. He doesn't, as Charles always liked to say, he doesn't say that we won't get anything we can't handle. There's a difference in that, right? We might get something we can't handle, that we can't get out of. We might die. That's possible. But there's no temptation that can overtake us. There's nothing that we can't go against. But going what you two are saying, I think also it's difficult for a righteous person to be saved because this isn't a sprint, it's a marathon, life. And how many faithful Christians do you know of who have fallen away along the way? Most. A lot, right? A lot of it happens. So that's one thing. Another thing is that just the general, why did Jesus have to come and die on the cross? We can't save ourselves. So it's with difficulty that we're saved. Like, God had to put his son on the cross in order to save us. Like, no matter how good we are, we can't save ourselves. So I think that's also an important thing to remember.
I think, too, lots of times, depending how you use the word righteous, when you think you're doing right, lots of times you're falling into something that's sin. Because the devil lets you manipulate it in your head that, like, I'm doing this, but I'm getting a reward out of it, so it's okay that I'm doing it. And you do these little justifications to yourself, but really, you're opening yourself up to sin, thinking that you're doing right and being righteous and things.
Yeah, we can rationalize a lot.
Like, we are humans
Yeah.
are the best rationalizers of everything, and slowly you just continue to do stuff.
Yeah, and that's what I was talking about too when I said about the devil. One of the biggest deceits for the devil is, you're good where you're at. Like, how many people think, oh, I'm a Christian and I'm good, but they've never done what they need to do to become a Christian. Or there's lots of things where along that way. So we definitely need to be aware of that and try to enlighten people wherever we can and be aware of it in our own lives. It's very easy. It's much easier to see problems in other people than it is in ourselves whenever we're doing those kind of things. So last question here on chapter 4, why would suffering be the will of God? It talks about, therefore let those also who suffer according to the will of God entrust their souls to a faithful Creator in doing what is right.
I think it goes back to why is it necessary for things to be refined? Why is the fire necessary to purify something? And the Bible talks a lot about that. It talks a lot about people being refined. That's the sermon today is about going through suffering. It's promised. I mean, it's not something that we might go through. It's promised. We absolutely 100% will go through it. And Paul talks in Romans about it produces character. It makes us endure, and then eventually that produces hope, because you have literally nothing left. Everything's been stripped from you, and all that's left is God.
Yeah, and what to me the best example of that, and we talked about this a lot in Job, so we're not going to. I only have a few minutes. We're not going to cover it, but we talked about why did God create the world, and without suffering, which God didn't create suffering, but He allowed it to come in, right? Because He gave us a choice. That's by giving us choice, that has to allow for these other things to happen. But if there wasn't any of that, there would be no honor, there would be no courage, and things like that. Like if we wouldn't have to stand up for what's right if that's not the way the world had been created. So, yeah, I think what you were talking about, just the refining, and to further his kingdom, here on earth. So, I guess the question you could ask is, what if God had never allowed sin or suffering into the world? Because he could have stopped it, but not the way he created the world, not with the intention of what he did, which was to give us a choice as to what we're going to do, give people a choice. All right, let's get 1 Peter chapter 5. If you guys want to read, let's just read the whole chapter. That way we can just cover in the few minutes we have left and see how much of what I had on my notes I can cover here before. Yeah, exactly.
All right, 1 Peter chapter 5. Therefore, I exhort the elders among you, as your fellow elder and witness of the sufferings of Christ, and a partaker also of the glory that is to be revealed. Shepherd the flock of God among you, exercising oversight, not under compulsion, but voluntarily, according to the will of God, and not for sword gain, but for eagerness, nor yet as lording over the allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples to the flock. And when the chief shepherd appears, you will receive an unfading crown of glory. You younger men, likewise, be subject to your elders, and all of you, clothe yourselves with the humility towards one another, as God is opposed to the proud, but gives grace to the humble. Therefore, humble yourselves under the mighty hand of God, that he may exalt you at the proper time, casting all your anxiety on him, because he cares for you. Be of sober spirit, be on alert. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. But resist him, firm in your faith, knowing that the same experiences of suffering are being accomplished by your brethren who are in the world. After you have suffered for a little while, the God of all grace, who called you to his eternal glory in Christ, will himself perfect, confirm, strengthen, and establish you. To him be dominion forever and ever. Amen. Through Silvanus, our faithful brother, for who I regard, I have written to you briefly, exhorting and testifying that this is the true grace of God. Stand firm in it. She who is in Babylon, chosen together with you, sends you greetings, and so does my son Mark. Greet one another with a kiss of love. Peace to you be all who are in Christ.
He is a fellow elder. Now, both Paul and Peter claim to be apostles of Christ, but only Peter claims to be an elder. There may be a couple of reasons for that. We know that in the list of characteristics that Paul gives to Timothy and Titus, that the elder is to be the husband of one wife. There's no indication that Paul was married, so that's a possibility. But we know that Peter was married. How do we know that?
His mother-in-law was healed.
Yeah, his mother-in-law was healed of an illness, right? And we also, there's some other indications as well. But we don't ever see that Peter has any children. I don't think there's any record of that, but it's quite possible. I don't know what the history, I didn't even look at that to see. But anyway, so there is a little bit of a difference in that Peter is now exhorting the elders as a fellow elder here. So what is Peter warning the church leaders about in this passage here? He says, don't be an elder if you're doing it because you feel like you have to, basically, right? Not under compulsion. It should be something you want to do. How would that apply to us? Well, there's a lot of congregations out there that only have a few people who could be an elder. And if you feel like because you're one of those few people, you have to be, you may do something you don't want to do, really, right? To be involved in that. So I think that could be something that would be applicable. What can happen if somebody becomes an elder when they feel like they have to do it?
They'll be very resentful.
Yeah, they might not do a very good job of it, right?
Decision that the congregation wants.
Yeah. So it can be detrimental if you have somebody in place as an elder who shouldn't be, who doesn't want to be. He also warns against being a dictator, right? Not in those exact words, but what were the words that he used? Not yet as lording it over those allotted to your charge, but proving to be examples of the flock. So what's the best way to lead? By example, right?
I was going to say by pushing people. Cracking a whip.
Cracking a whip from behind.
Yeah, that's right.
So don't there can be temptation when you're in a position of leadership to try to force people to see things your way and to do things your way. So I think he's warning against that. Now on the flip side of that, Peter then tells the younger members of the church to be subject to those who are older. So does he mean the elders, like the leaders, or does he just mean people who are older than you in general? Yeah, does it matter? Not really. I think we've already talked about the relationships and how we're supposed to have proper respect for different relationships and behave properly towards each other. So there's no way to know for sure, but I think the context indicates that they're to submit to their leaders because he had just finished talking about elders and how they're supposed to lead and what their attitude is supposed to be. So then turning to younger members and saying, be subject to those who are older would seem to indicate to the church leaders is what he's talking about there. But it doesn't really matter. Either way, we're supposed to treat each other properly with the proper respect. We're to be humble. So what does humble mean again? It means that we have the right view of ourselves, right? And our place and put others above ourselves or not think of ourselves more highly than we ought to or of our self-importance. Like we already talked about, Peter warns that the devil is walking around like a roaring lion. And so he tells us, things to do to combat that. Repeats a lot of the lists that we've already talked about. Be of sober spirit, self-controlled, be alert. Instead of what Jacob and Leah both were talking about, like instead of putting ourselves in places that we shouldn't be with temptation or allowing ourselves to go into places we shouldn't, and I don't mean physical places necessarily, though I could, but just instead of allowing ourselves to do things we shouldn't or to think about things we shouldn't or those kind of things, be on the alert. Also be on the alert for how the devil's trying to deceive us, because we know he does that all the time. Stand firm in the faith. We have to know God's word and practice it in order to stand up to the devil. Help each other. We know there are others in the world that are undergoing the same thing. He's talking about persecution, in this case, for them. So help each other. And then trust God, knowing that he has the power. And at the end, we already know we won the victory, right? Because of what God and Jesus have done for us. In the conclusion here, I'm basically out of time, but I'll take just a minute to the conclusion. The conclusion is interesting because he concludes this letter by noting that Silas has helped him with it. Now, who's Silas? I think most everybody thinks that this is the Silas who was with Paul on the second missionary journey. So Peter probably dictated the letter to Silas and had him deliver it to the churches. He also says that she who is in Babylon sends greetings. Now, who is she who is in Babylon? Anybody have any idea? Now, some people think that that's referring to like Jerusalem, like she who is in Babylon. But Guy Woods, once again, I looked at what he had to say about it, and he thinks that it refers to Peter's wife, she who is in Babylon. Babylon was a city in Asia, and Peter's wife was likely traveling around with him when he was going to these churches. So he believed that the lady being referred to in this passage is Peter's wife. I don't know that we can know for sure, but as I read it, that actually makes more sense than trying to come up with some kind of a being the church or in general or something like that, especially since he's talking about personal greetings here, Silas, and then he mentions John Mark. Now, who's John or Mark? Who's Mark? I think it's, once again, the John Mark who went with Paul on his missionary journey. So some interesting things there at the end that he says as he concludes the letter. All right, we're out of time. I would have gone a little deeper on some of those things at the end there, but I think we got it covered. So I don't know what Jimmy's going to be teaching starting next week, but it'll be a surprise. All right. So, but thanks for everybody's comments, and we'll be back for worship in just a few minutes. Beyond this land of parting blues.